So today we're going to look at that very scary provincial exam, also known as the grade 12 ELA Provincial Standards Test. And this will take place when you are finished all the assignments in your course, and it's like the final thing that you do. So who writes it? If you're a Manitoba student taking grade 12 English, you're required to write the Provincial Standards Test. You'll write it when you've completed all the assignments in the course. So you will contact me and arrange a date and a time to write it. Who made the test? Usually the provincial standards test is something you get from the government, but in this case it's made by me, the Adult Learning Center in Winkler. I wrote it, so no surprises. What does it test? It counts for 20% of your final course mark, and it's assessing whether or not you've met the knowledge, skills, and abilities of a grade 12 language arts students. It's understood your performance on the test shows your growth and your achievement in your other English courses, not just grade 12. What can you do to succeed? So while many of these test activities are designed to help you plan and write, they also assess specific learning outcomes. So you want to participate in all the test activities, complete all questions that have a mark attached to them. Zeros have the biggest negative effect on test scores, so you don't want to leave anything blank. You also want to pace yourself during the test and check over your work to make sure you've given the best answer possible. Monitor your time carefully. You get an hour and a half per section. And you can use any tools available to you, like your class notes, Google, sample answers, whatever. There's two parts to the test. The first part is reading response, and the second part is writing. So in reading response, you're going to read some text and answer questions. Sometimes it asks for you to choose one. So just read the one. Don't bother reading the second one. Just choose one because you're under a time constraint here. You get an hour and a half per booklet. The second part is the writing part. Again, an hour and a half. They give you something, a topic or a prompt to write about. You do some pre-writing activities, you draft it, and then you have time to revise it and hand in a final. So the first part, the reading response, again, you get an hour and a half. It's worth 35 marks. Most students say this is what they find the most stressful. There's 6 questions. One is worth 10 marks. The rest are worth 5. So for a total of 35 marks. Because you're only given an hour and a half, you basically have to complete a question every 15 minutes. Your responses are leveled, not graded as correct or incorrect. So the more you develop your response, the higher the grades will be. And we're going to be taking a look at this in some detail. But I guess the first strategy in getting ready is preview. So preview the test. Take a look at it, briefly flip through it, and say to yourself, what am I looking at? Read the questions. Preview the whole booklet. Try to put the questions in your own words to make sure you understand them. Highlight keywords. Make sure that if there's 2 parts to a question, you've highlighted both parts. So you have 90 minutes, there's 6 readings. There's only 4 readings if you only choose one. And the ones worth 10 marks will take more time. So maybe start with those. You don't have to start with number 1. You can start with the ones that are worth more marks. Pace yourself so you complete everything. Zeros have the biggest negative effect. So don't spend so much time trying to get a 5 out of 5 on one question and then you get 0 on 2 others. So make sure that you plan your time. If the question asks for you to choose between two readings, just choose one. Choose the best one for you. It saves a lot of time. And, a good strategy is write your answers on a Word document, then copy and paste them into the online test. And that way, if you run out of time or the computer crashes or you run into some kind of problems, you still have your answers. You don't lose everything, right? You can also send me an email and ask for extra time. I'm kind of limited to how much extra time I can give you, but I can stretch it a bit. The computer's not going to boot you out when the time is up. It gives you a few minutes, and it also will warn you that your time is getting close. So here's an example of a reading. So this one's called Self-Esteem is Contagious, The Royal Knights of Spanish Harlem. And then there's about a page, 2 pages, three. So it's about 2 3/4 of a page of reading. And then here's the one question. Analyze how Bill Hall strengthens a sense of community with his students. Support your response with reference to the text. So that's the kind of thing. So you're going to read this 2 3/4 page article. Always read the question first before you begin the reading, because then as you're reading, you can highlight things and you know what you're looking for. So the word analyze means they want your opinion here. So how does he show a strength of community? You can argue he doesn't or he does, and then you're going to show us how, that keyword how, and then support your answer with reference to the text. So on Learn, I've posted some of these examples, so take a look at those so that you can practice, right? When you're answering the question, it's a good idea to use the words from the question in your answer. So analyze how Bill Hull strengthens a sense of community. You would say something like, Bill Hall strengthens his sense of community by doing such and such. So use the key words from the question in your topic sentence. And then it wants you to support them. So give reasons why your answer is correct. So 3 good reasons why they should believe what you say is true. And for each reason, come up with examples or quotes that support it. Each response here should be a minimum of 6 sentences. So that's how many supports they're looking for. So here's an example of how they've marked it. So level 5 is where we want to be, or even level 3, 4 will do it. And so you can see how they use the prompt in their answer. There are many ways how Bill Hall strengthens a shared sense of community with his students. So there's the topic sentence using those keywords. First off, one of the main ways is by believing in them, and then they give a quote. With this support from Bill, these less than kids were brought together. So they give the quote and then they explain it. So read these over. They give very specific examples. This one even gives page numbers. This is what you don't want to do. As Bill worked at the school and had an idea of what kids went to that school, he could tell that all the kids connected somehow. Bill knew he needed to find something to help connect the kids, so as he seen someone with a chessboard and with his knowledge of chess crossing many cultural boundaries, he gave it a shot. As Bill sees the students winning more and more, he could see them starting to bond. So there's nothing in here about what he did to help the students find a sense of community. It's not specific enough. There's no specific examples, etc. So look these over in your readings package so you get a more familiar sense of what constitutes a level 5. So in their analysis, the government said this particular answer gave a thorough analysis with these supports, right? This one, he provided a clear and developed analysis with these sentences and supports. The bad one, it says it's a very underdeveloped. He needed to find something. support winning more and more. So it's just not enough, right? It's not specific. There's not enough supports, etc. You can see this one, they give 3 reasons why he gave them a sense of community. This one only gave 2. Here they gave 3 supports, and here they gave 3 supports. So the difference between a 4 and a 5 is 3 reasons rather than just 2. There is a part in the reading called an extended response, and this is the one that's worth 10 marks. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. The extended response, you need to be able to find the main idea and respond personally to the idea. And it's worth 10 marks. Often they give you 2 readings that you can choose from. So here's an example. A sound of summer running or a nation response. So there's 2 readings. You would choose one, and you can see how they checked off this is the one that they're using. So it says read the following text and choose one. So you can choose this story. So only read that story. Using specific references, write an extended response in which you do 2 things. For 5 marks, identify and explain what you think is the main idea, and explain how this idea affirms or challenges your understanding of human behavior. So the first response, the story A Nation Responds, is talking about the wildfires in Fort McMurray and how they had to evacuate the city and how Canadians across the country responded. There were a lot of volunteers, such as the staff from the Canadian Red Cross and local Canadian citizens like adults and children, raising money and gathering supplies for the evacuees. The main idea of the text is that regardless of our political stances, socioeconomic background, region, language, race, or religion, we're all Canadians. And that when there's a portion of our population in need, we will all give a little in support of our fellow Canadians, as that bond is more important than any other disagreements or misunderstandings. And then they give the supports. So during the disaster, there was this image. Even Prime Minister Trudeau said this. And at the end of the day, we're all Canadian. So this is just the first part of it. The biggest mistake you can do here is just retelling the text or the story. You need to identify a main idea and then show us how that idea is developed. So what's the point this story is making, and how do you know? So make sure you answer those 2 things for the first part of an extended response. What's the point this story is making, and how do I know? You can also respond personally to the main idea. So make connections between the text and your experience. So this person says, this idea affirms my understanding of human nature, that when it comes down to it, human lives are more important than any disagreement, blah, 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 blah. So you want to make sure that you make that personal connection. You want to identify techniques that the author uses to communicate the ideas. So if it's a factual text, you might talk about the statistics or the appeals to your reason. If it's a story or a literary text, you might talk about character or symbols or images. And it's worth 10 marks. So here they break it down. They say the response we just looked at provides an insightful explanation, it gives supports, and it extends to a broader context. So they landed up getting 5 out of 5 for the first part of that response. Then you had to, in the second part of the response, you have to explain how this idea challenges your understanding. So this is making that personal connection. And they got a 5 out of 5, right? They provide an insightful analysis of how the idea challenges their understanding, and it's perceptive. The next part in the reading is poetry. I always find this the most difficult. If you're not someone who gets poetry, it can be challenging. They want you to make meaning from the poems and provide supports. So here's an example of what they want you to do. Identify an idea communicated either where there's a wall or mother to son. Analyze how language and or stylistic devices are used to communicate the idea. Consider things like diction, imagery, metaphor, repetition, symbolism, tone, etc. So again, they're asking you for 2 poems. You just have to choose one. So you want to choose the one that makes the most sense to you. This question requires you to make meaning of the poem before you respond. So you can use soapstone, which is what we did in our poetry unit, looking at the subject and the occasion, the audience, the purpose, the speaker, the tone. As you're reading the poem, make some notes. Look at the way it's organized. What are the very vivid words or vocabulary used? What connections can you make between the poem and your life? What do you think the main idea is? The key thing here is to connect your answer with words from the poem. So you want to make sure that you are connecting it to the poem and connecting it to your own life or a societal issue. If you connect it to something like that, a more deeper response, then you're going to get a higher level. So not only connect the idea to the poem and the words in the poem and the images in the poem, but connect it to yourself and to society. Here's another one. Identify an idea communicated in either where there's a wall and then analyze. So here's an example of one. So the idea, any obstacle can be overcome. So for that, you just need to state the idea. It doesn't have to be long. But the analysis is where you spend more time, right? So in this one, the idea of how any obstacle can be overcome is communicated through symbolism. The last 5 lines of the poem show this. There's zeppelins, helicopters, rockets, bombs, battering rams, armies with trumpets, where all at one blast shatters the foundation. The heavy militant symbols show a forceful way of breaking down the barriers. It also describes a metaphor in which their military devices act as the ways you can break down the walls. So you can see they're explaining the connection. What I find a lot of students do is they'll just say, well, they use this metaphor or these symbols of these things because they're all military. But you have to go beyond that and say, what's the effect of using those words, right? So it's the effect of something. They can all break things down. They can all destroy things. Then they talk about metaphors, secret passwords you can overhear. And then they talk about if there's a well, there's a way. The tone of the poem communicates the idea. The tone is very deliberate, without breaks. It uses the metaphors to do this. Here's an obstacle. Here's a way to go through it. So for analyzing these poems, you really have to get into it, look at the way that it's structured, what words do they use, are there images, metaphors, right? The next kind of reading is always a visual. So sometimes it's a photo, sometimes it's an ad, graffiti, painting. It's always something very, very visual. So when you're looking at it, think about the key elements, the line, color, perspective, the font, the white space, bolding. What did the creator try to give you the message of in this visual? And what are the key elements? So those are the 2 questions. What are the key elements of this visual, and what's the main idea, right? What's the message? You then have to find support in the visual in the same way you have to find support in a printed text. So use all the elements of the visual. to back up your answer. Um, there's not a right or wrong answer. Students across the province respond in different ways, but the more you connect the visual with something else, like a theme or something else in the world, my experience is the higher your level will be. So here's an example. Um, the visual is war is over. There is some text, but primarily they want you to focus on the visual. And they ask, explain whether or not this photo reflects a brighter future. Support your response with reference. So you're looking for something like optimism, something a brighter future, and we'll look at one student's response. So they say this photo reflects or explains a brighter future. Again, using the words of the question in your first sentence. Since the people on the picture look very happy that the war is over. Also, some of the people hold a paper that says peace, which already represents what their future will be like or what they're hoping for. They're also all cheering and probably screaming that the war is finally over. If I would probably be in a war and come back alive, I would probably look the same. I think this is a very good example of how their futures will look like. This picture also reminds me of Remembrance Day, where we remember all the soldiers that have passed away in World War I and II, where we also remember ourselves that Canada is a free and peaceful land. All the people also have a big smile on their face, which represents a big part of the picture just by seeing their smile. If we would see sad faces, then we would right away think very differently and have different thoughts. I think a facial expression makes a very big impact about what you think. I think this image is a very good example of a brighter future. So again, this one was leveled a 5 out of 5, and it's all about making those connections, right? Connecting what you see in the visual to the message. You'll also notice they don't take marks off for spelling and grammar in the reading response. So you can, lots of these have terrible grammar and spelling, but they don't lose marks for that. So that's the reading response, and that's worth 35 marks in total. The second section is the written part. So the first part you get an hour and a half to do the first part, and then you set up a time to do the second part. So the first part here of the writing task is they will give you a prompt and they give you a planning chart. So use that chart to plan out your thinking. Make sure you understand what they're asking for and choose the form. So here's the planning. It's worth 5 marks. What are you writing about? Which form will be the most effective? Why are you writing it? Who's being targeted? Who's your reader? And where's the text presented? So you'll notice the form. You don't have to write an essay. You can write an article, a column, an essay, a eulogy or a speech at someone's death, memoir, a monologue, a proposal, a script, a short story, a speech. You can basically write anything you want, but you have to make sure that it fits your main idea, the purpose. So is it to entertain? Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Who's the audience? Is it like at a grade 12 graduation and you're the valedictorian giving a speech? And the context, where is it going to be presented? Where are they going to read it? So just by filling this out, you get 5 marks. And then explain how your choices work together to make an effective text. So just going back, you want to identify each of these variables and explain the connection. So you want to make sure that you've explained things. So a central idea. So they ask you in your planning chart for your central idea. The first thing they ask you is central idea. So this depends on the form you use, right? If you're writing an essay, your central idea might be an opinion or a thesis. If you're writing a letter, your central idea might have a focus. If you're writing an article, you might have a main idea. If it's a speech or memoir, it might be a theme. If it's a poem, it might be a theme or a mood. So make sure your idea fits with your form. The next part is the purpose. So when they ask you the purpose, they're saying, what do you want the audience to think or do or feel after reading the text? What do you hope the text will accomplish? Choose only one purpose. So is it to enlighten, to entertain, to raise awareness, to persuade, to argue, to inspire? Um, this is a transactional English course, so usually the purpose is to report something that happened, or reflect on something that happened, or record something that happened. But it could be any of those: to argue, to entertain, to persuade. For the form, each form has its own formula. So if you think back to Module 1, we looked at narrative, descriptive, compare, contrast, and everyone had something different in it, right? So make sure your audience and your form fit together. So if your topic was hip hop music and your audience was senior citizens, that doesn't really fit, right? Because senior citizens aren't likely the big audience for reading an article on hip hop. So if you're writing an article, you need a catchy opening. You want to use facts, statistics, personal stories, quotes, comparisons, and it needs a controlling idea or focus, and then a conclusion that summarizes. If it's an essay, remember the essay can look different. It could be a narrative, which tells a story. So in that case, it needs to have a plot, a beginning, middle, and end. It needs to have setting, characters, conflict, maybe some dialogue. Okay. Expository, argumentative, descriptive, compare, contrast. Those are all different, right? The tone of these is different, etc. What you might find helpful when you are writing is, earlier on I gave you an essay template. You might want to have that handy to do your planning. If it's a speech, the speech usually begins with a greeting where you recognize the audience, you identify yourself and your subject. It's usually organized around a theme. It has a very distinct intro and conclusion, and usually the intro and conclusion mirror themselves. So if the catchy opening is a question, the conclusion would answer the question. A memoir is a person remembering a specific incident or a theme in their life. It's narrative, so it has a plot. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. It has characters, even though it might be true. You want some setting, you want some description of the people involved, etc. So know those forms really well. For the audience, it's important to identify clearly who these people are and what are their common characteristics. So think about things like their age, their interests, their tastes. Be as specific as you can. Don't just identify the audience, but describe who they are. Record the factors of your audience that will affect the way they read and interpret what you've written. So, here's some examples. The audience for my speech will be senior 1 to 4 students at a high school assembly. Students tend to have short attention spans and know a little about the topic. Their interest level may be low. Second example, the audience for my article will be the adult subscribers to a parents magazine. These are likely 30-something suburb dwellers who used to think they knew it all but are now looking for wisdom. And the last one, The audience is community readers of our town website, most of whom are middle-aged adults. Most readers will look for connections to family, friends, or community members, so the tone must not be critical. So you want to be as specific as you can with the audience. Context, so they ask you for the context. That's asking you for the where and the when. Um, so the context along with audience affects how formal or informal your tone will be. So if the context was, a poem read at the end of a funeral, you may not want humor, right? So here's some examples. It might be a letter read in the opinion section of the Friday edition of the Free Press leading up to Father's Day. It might be a speech heard as the third speech in a long afternoon grad ceremony in a church hall. I don't know what Larry Hall is, with a formal atmosphere. So the context, you want to, again, be as specific as possible. So here's the 5 things. This one received a 5 out of 5. So they talked about the purpose: to inform, to persuade that mental illness is not something to be scared of, and to inform my audience of how to deal with it. Central idea: accepting the truth is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. The form is a memoir. The audience is people with mental health issues and their family and friends. And the context at a support group or a meeting for people with mental illnesses. So there you go. So you want something that is specific. That one got a 5 out of 5, believe it or not. So the next thing they get you to do for 5 marks is explain your writing variables. So it says explain how the writing variables you identified make an effective plan. So like this one says, I chose to write a memoir. This ties in with my audience and context, as I chose to present it to people with mental illnesses. Giving an example of what I've gone through allows me to connect with my audience. Through the form of memoir, I can convey my understanding of their struggles, and therefore they will hopefully share their own struggles. My central idea, accepting the truth, was chosen because I want to encourage my audience to accept the truth of their situation, blah, 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 blah. So they gave that a 5 out of 5. They said it gave a thorough explanation of how the students' choices fit together, and they gave supports, right? Through the form of a memoir, I can. My central idea was chosen because my purpose would blah, blah, blah. So read over these examples. They're all posted there, and it gives you a better idea of what they're looking for. So the next thing is to draft it. So you can use a template like the essay template. You can use an outline to make sure that you've got all the elements covered. If you're writing a narrative, maybe use a story arc or the pre-writing things that we did for that before you start to write. Make sure your topic's very specific. The more point form notes you have here, the easier it'll be to write your final. My advice is just free write. So don't stop and revise, just write. You can change everything later, but just get all your ideas down. You don't have time to just, fuss and fume. So just write as fast as you can. You don't have to start with the introduction. You can start with the body or the conclusion. Create strong paragraphs. Make sure you have lots of supporting evidence or explanation. Each paragraph should have a topic sentence, unless you're writing a narrative or a poem. So those are literary and very different. Some ideas for the introduction. You could provide background information, explain or define any terms, raise a question, begin with a specific example, an illustration or a quote. So map out your piece when you are in this section. The better you draft it, the easier it will be later to write the whole thing and revise it. So once you revise it, make sure you have clearly identified your central idea. Is it well developed and supported? Have you used details to support any statements you made? Have you achieved your purpose of informing or persuading or entertaining or inspiring, whatever? Have you kept your audience's attention? Have you stuck to the right kind of form? Like if it's an essay, do you have a thesis? If it's a speech, did you introduce yourself and say greetings to your audience? Um, in each of those forms, there's specifics, so make sure you have those. Do you have transitions? So transitions help your reader move from idea to idea quite smoothly. So make sure you have those transitions. Do you have a conclusion that summarizes the points that you've made? If it's a poetic ending, um, does it feel like it's the end of the poem? You've got something for them to think about. Do you have a good title? So you need to title whatever your written piece is. Look at the words that you've chosen, the level of formality. Make sure you've targeted your audience and that the language and the images you've used are good for your targeted audience. And then, of course, you want to look out for things like these. So the most common errors are bad spelling. Now, in the written one, of course, writing conventions like grammar and spelling, this is where you are deducted. So check your spelling, contractions and apostrophes. So you only need a apostrophe if you're squeezing two words together or if you're showing possession, but you don't use apostrophes for plural. Lack of subject-verb agreement. So if your subject is plural, then your verb has to be plural. So if you say Herman and Jack were going to the store, so the were is plural. You can't say Herman and Jack was going to the store. Vagueness. So a lot of times students are very vague with their words, and so their meaning isn't very clear. So you want to make sure that you're choosing words where things are very clear and that the reader doesn't have to interpret. Faulty word choice. So make sure that the words that you've used fit, that they're not the wrong word used incorrectly. And then pronouns. So sometimes people will say, Susie likes Superstore. She takes her bike and likes to shop at it. So the it would refer to Superstore, not the bike, but the bike was the last noun used. So you have to be careful with pronouns that you're being very specific. So basically, that's how you can prepare for the English test. Plan it out, plan your time out, read the questions before you answer. Make sure that you're zeroing in, being very specific, making connections, writing a response that's long enough. And I think you should be quite fine. It's worth 20% of your total English mark. And if you fail, you don't necessarily fail the course. It's worth 20%. So you want to go into the test with what I call a buffer. So make sure your mark is, in the high 70s. And then if you completely bomb the test, you haven't bombed the course, kind of thing. If you have any questions at all, then give me a shout. Otherwise, look at the practice materials. And then when you're finished everything, we'll set up a date and time for you to write the test. Thank you.